Hey folks, welcome to another More Than a Refresh, the T3D Sessions. Today we have Kevin Jernigan, who is going to tell us from Oracle to AWS to MongoDB and then Google Cloud why he hates databases. I'm kidding. But he has moved on. Kevin, introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, thanks, JD. Yeah, we'll get into why I don't actually hate databases, but we'll get into that. Yeah. So great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, and I did in my career so far anyway go from two different times at Oracle, working in the product team for Oracle database. So core database technologies there, and then to AWS. I worked on Aurora Postgres. I built that product up from zero over 5 years. Then I went to MongoDB for a couple of years working on the Atlas serverless capability that MongoDB launched while I was there. And then I was at Google Cloud for a couple of years working on AlleyDB, more specifically AlleyDB Omni, the downloadable Docker container version of AlleyDB. But I left Google Cloud at the end of March, earlier this year.
Yeah, I found that out when I tried to email you.
Yeah.
You didn't reach out. You weren't, hey, JD, I'm doing this new thing. I mean.
Well, I didn't leave to do a new thing. I left to take some time away from just, one grinded out job to the next, right?
Sure.
And, so I took some time, like I said, and I had discovered that I didn't actually want to work on database technology anymore. And kind of for me to understand that, I had to go back and think about, well, what did I study in college? So I went to college a long time ago, for some people watching and listening anyway. So I went to Harvard in the early 80s. I was a class of 87, but when I got there in 1983, Harvard had just created a separate computer science degree. Now, they weren't early, they were kind of late. Even back then, that was late to have a CS degree. But Harvard, especially then, is a liberal arts school. So technology degree, what's that, right? So anyway, they created a CS degree just when I got there as a freshman. And there were only 2 tracks. You had to choose one of these 2 tracks. It was either databases and operating systems, kind of a lower half of simplified systems back then, or languages and compilers. So choose a track, focus on that for your next 4 years, graduate, go off and find a job. And I chose languages and compilers. I wasn't interested in databases and operating systems. And while I was there, took classes on things like expert systems and neural networks, even worked for an entire semester in a class on how to build a system that would take English and turn it into code.
That sounds a little
sounds familiar,
predictive.
Right? Yeah, but so just hold that thought for a minute, because then my first job out of college was with this small company called Oracle. Oracle was a small company. It had 800 employees, 150 million in revenue. Not a world,
not the monster they are today.
Yeah, but like a lot of people, I talked to a bunch of companies, took a job at Oracle, but I could just as easily have taken a job at some company that failed in 2 years too. A lot of it back then was just luck, right? But I fell into databases, so I had to learn about databases on the job at Oracle, and obviously that worked because I kept on getting jobs with database companies. But again, it wasn't actually what I really was fundamentally interested in. But for a long time, I lost track of the AI world, right? There was, if you may or may not remember, the Japanese 5th generation project in the late 70s and 80s. Japan's government invested a bunch of money to create AI. That was their intentional, explicit plan with the 5th generation of computing, as they called it, was to create.
That's the Pentium generation, right?
No.
No?
No, it was way before.
No, that was 90s. Pentium was that's how old we're getting. Pentium was the 90s.
Exactly. So yeah, Japan's government was, remember, more generally, the U.S. and the Western economies were very concerned that Japan was going to take over the world economically in the 70s, right? And Japan, doubling down on that, said, "Good, we're going to invest in AI. We're going to get so far ahead." And so there was a big kind of minor panic in the tech world about the 5th generation project, and there was a response called Cycorp, CYCORP. You can probably find it. I think they still kind of exist. But Cycorp was kind of the US response to the 5th generation project. And that's about when I stopped paying attention because I was off working on database stuff. But there's been a couple AI winters since then, where, kind of the focus and the belief that we could ever achieve AI have kind of fallen off for a while, and then it comes back with new innovation and falls off, comes back. Anyway, I was spending all my time in databases. Fast forward to, earlier this year, I left Google. What am I going to do next? I'm not going to do a job search right away. I'm just going to kind of sit back a little bit and see what's going on in the markets and what's going on in my head. And I saw some database opportunities, but I just couldn't get excited about going into the job interview process and then putting put out there. I was trying to figure out why. And it really was that, my last few database jobs, it's been kind of, reinventing the wheel over and over again. What I mean by that is, like defining how to do backups and setting up HA and DR and observability and IAM access and all those things. Those are all solved problems for the most part. Yet I kept on having to do them again and again. Every new product that I worked on, well, we thought we were smarter than the last 40 years of database innovation. We were going to reinvent the wheel on these things. And I was like, you don't really need to reinvent the wheel there, for the most part. And
there's micro optimizations to be made, but that's about it. They are solved problems. I agree with you.
And so, I was getting paid well to solve problems. It was just not that interesting, right? And I could have gone and got another job to solve those known solved problems and continue to get paid well. But like I said, I was just no longer as excited as I would hope to be to work on those things. So eventually
what's exciting you now?
Yeah. So what's exciting me now is the work I'm doing with a company called J4. J4Cap.com is the website. But I actually first started talking to J4 early this year. And this is where I might rant a little bit. I was in a bar in New York ranting about LLMs and how they're just nothing but brute forced algorithms from the 80s. And I mean, what are we doing here? We're ingesting all the text we can get our hands on, whether it's legal or not, meaning violating copyright.
It's largely illegal is what it is. It's theft.
And we're building a statistical model based upon, the occurrence of words next to each other or groups of words, et cetera. Obviously much deeper than that mathematically, but only that. And they're basically curve fitting models across many, many dimensions, but still we're fitting curves based upon the prompt you type in and statistically responding. There's no...
I had another guest that basically said the problem with LLMs is that, essentially what you said, is that they rely on the average. The problem with the average is not that bright. The average can barely function. If it was a human, the average can barely use a cash register, right? And I don't mean that as derogatory. It's just a statement of fact when you're boiling down the statistics.
Yeah, and there's a whole misconception of what intelligence is. Intelligence isn't just parroting back words you've heard before.
Right.
Which is, in a fancy way, is what, these LLMs are doing. So I was ranting about all that in a bar in Manhattan. And a friend of mine overheard me and said, we need to talk, because he had invested in this company called J4. And so I, talked to them off and on for 6 months, 7, 8 months actually, before eventually joining them. I only joined at the beginning of this month. So I've been with J4 for the month of October. So what does J4 have? J4 has a technology or a product we call stochastic learning. And the way we describe it at a high level, it's a much more energy efficient way of doing computation for machine learning and neural networks, on the order of 2 to 3 orders of magnitude more efficient. Now, if you look at what OpenAI and Anthropic and the rest of the LLM companies say they need for compute to continue to scale their models and scale their businesses, what they need is crazy in terms of what we have to do to our power grids and power generation and even water to cool all
Well,
this.
from a society perspective, it's disgustingly irresponsible. you're basically, because of the inrush of demand for electricity for these centers, it's put the burden of capitalizing that on your general public.
Yeah.
3 years ago, this is before I went off grid, but 3 years ago, my electric bill was $250 every 2 months. My last electric bill was $900. It's why I went off grid, because if I'm going to spend 10 grand a year on electricity, I might as well just put that into solar.
Yeah. No, generate it myself. Yeah. There's a lot to that. If we can help reduce that by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude, that's, a fundamental change. That's very disruptive in a lot of hopefully good ways. Our stochastic learning runs on standard chips. It doesn't need GPUs, though it can benefit from GPUs, but you don't need it to get that 2 to 3 orders of magnitude efficiency, right? So you don't even need to have special data centers with thousands of GPUs in them.
Well, does J4 have an open data set that it can be worked with for people to play around with or anything?
Not yet, right? So the story of the company is that they've been around about 16 years, building up their AI capabilities by focusing on trading a hedge fund. That's why it's J4 Capital. So j4cap.com tells some story. But the technology, the AI technology they've built to manage that fund kept on spitting out SPDEs, stochastic partial differential equations. And so they took those advances from that system and basically generalized it into what we call stochastic learning. There is a patent filing out there. You can Google it and find it, so you can see, the details of what stochastic learning really is. And so that's where it came from. But we've only recently decided that it's time to kind of come out of stealth mode and start talking about what we're doing, because we didn't have a product or a technology that was productizable. That's why they hired me as a chief product officer, like I said, beginning of this month, because it's time to take products and go forward. We have other innovations that we think are also pretty fundamental to getting to brain scale AI. We think we're close to solving the traveling salesman problem, or combinatorial optimization, if you want to be more technical. If we can productize that as well and help companies improve their logistics by 1 to 5%, that's worth, many, many billions of dollars to things like Amazon or Walmart and any organization that has to move lots of things around the planet. I immediately think of the FEMA operations that are probably mobilizing to help Jamaica as soon as Hurricane Melissa moves out. Just figuring out the optimal best way to move all the people and everything else. Getting that truly optimal is actually worth a lot of money. So,
all right. Well, hey, hate to cut you off. I want to let you go a little long because it's actually an interesting conversation. And if you'd like to talk more about it, we'd be more than happy to have you on again on the longer format. But with that, this has been more than a refresh, the T3D Sessions with Kevin Jernigan. Check him out on LinkedIn and or J4Cap.com.